You guys have been so well behaved that I wanted to reward you today, and I bought you a Junior's cheesecake. It's the best cake in the entire world. I guess more for me. Okay, so this will be our third lecture on the Civil War. We're starting to wrap it up and get close to the end. What we're talking about today is social and economic impacts of the war. So what is life like for the people that are not necessarily doing the fighting? What is American life like because of the Civil War? We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about some decisive battles. We'll talk about Fredericksburg and how that impacted the war, and we'll learn some important concepts there of how you can lose battles but end up winning the war. We'll also talk about Gettysburg. Now, Gettysburg is interesting. It happens in July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 1863. Real quick, what are the years, what are the dates of the Civil War? Exactly. Most people think of Gettysburg as, by the way, in case you didn't know, 1861 to 1865. And so Gettysburg is 1863. Most people think of Gettysburg as the last battle of the Civil War, or the ending battle. And that's not necessarily the case. It is a decisive battle. It will be the last time that the South invades the North. However, it's not the end of the war. This thing is going to drudge along for over another year. It's going to keep on going, and that's when we're going to start talking about total war. When people just want it to end, and they're going to start doing things to other Americans' property that they might not have thought they would do at the beginning of the war, okay? The frustration is set in, and now it's time for total war. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Okay, understand the divisions. Of course, Civil War is North versus South. You've got that. But it's not a united North versus a united South per se. The North has divisions in itself. The South has divisions in itself. What do you think some divisions could be in the South? Take a second. What would be an obvious division? Perhaps not everybody wanted to secede. Perhaps some people wanted to stay in the Union. Why is Gettysburg important? General Lee loses 1/3 of his troops, and what happens at Appomattox Courthouse? That is the end of the war. Before I show you the slide, what is the Anaconda plan? Give me the 3 parts. Exactly. I knew you knew that. Okay, and here's a quick video on the Anaconda plan.
I'm General Winfield Scott of the United States military, and at the outset of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln put me in charge of the Union Army. I'm a veteran of the War of 1812, the War of Mexico. Now, I have a plan to defeat the Confederacy. A 3-part plan called the Anaconda plan. Just like a giant snake, I plan to squeeze the Confederacy, force them to surrender. The first step of my plan is a naval blockade of the South's coastline. In a blockade, armed forces block the traffic of goods in and out of the country. I plan to take control of the Mississippi River. This would split the Confederacy into 2. And finally, I plan to capture Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy. Richmond's only about 100 miles away from Washington, D.C., and because of this, Virginia became the site of many battles during the Civil War.
Let's talk divisions in the South. So in Georgia, just barely over 50 people supported the war. Does that make sense? So most people were not ready to secede anyhow. In general, in the South, the more slaves you have, the more you support secession. Does that make sense? They also didn't like the fact that there was a draft. They're fighting for states' rights, but as the war goes on, they're losing their autonomy. to this Confederate government, which must be even more strict than the Union. Now, in the North, not everyone liked the Emancipation Proclamation. First, do you remember what the Emancipation Proclamation does? True or false? The Emancipation Proclamation frees all the slaves. That is false. It frees all the slaves in states that were in rebellion. So Lincoln frees the slaves in the South, where he has no power. But in the North, where he does have the power, he lets those states keep their slaves. Okay? Even with all of that going on, people in the North were not happy about the Emancipation Proclamation. Some people in the North. Remember also, Lincoln does not win by 100% of the vote. He wins with about 40% of the vote, and the other 60% being split amongst the other three candidates. So there are people in the North that did not vote for Lincoln, that did not want Lincoln, that blame Lincoln for the war. And if you are a Democrat in the North who criticized the war, you get a special name. It's called a Copperhead. And it's underlined, which is my little way of letting you know you need to know the term Copperhead. People in the North, Democrats in the North, that criticized the war. All right. What did habeas corpus mean? Think about it. Habeas corpus, what did that mean? Okay, it means show me the body, present the body. Habeas corpus is if the government charges you with a crime, they have to give you a trial, okay? During this time, both Lincoln and Davis will suspend habeas corpus. Now, who's Davis? Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederacy, okay? And then Abraham Lincoln, president in the North. If habeas corpus is suspended, what does that mean? That means they can arrest you, no trial. And there's a variety of reasons that this is happening, but the book emphasizes the fact that people were trying to encourage you to desert or not to join. They're trying to get you out of the army, but there were other reasons as well. Okay, a draft means required military service. Remember that? Very good. Okay, you can avoid the draft. Basically, if you have money, the criticism, rich man's war, poor man's fight. Okay, what's this going to be? Who's going to pay for this war? Wars aren't free. Now, Mussolini said the wars is the lifeblood of the nation, which is interesting. But Sun Tzu says that no nation benefits from prolonged warfare. So you got to have a short-term gain economically when there's war, but after a while it seems to drain the nation. So let's talk about the economics of war. Before I give you all the answers, take 1 second here. Let's make it 15 seconds. And think, what's going to happen economically to the North and to the South? Is the South going to sell more cotton and make more money? Or are they going to sell less cotton? What about the North pumping out all of these war materials? And what about the North having so many soldiers in the draft? What's going to happen to the North and the South? Go ahead and take a second. Did you just fast forward to get to this part? I said take a second and think about the economics of war. I caught you, maybe some of you. Okay, seriously. All right, here we go. In the North, industry boomed. You are pumping out as many guns, as many tents, as many textiles, whatever you can do, supplies for the war, okay? The draft takes away some of your workforce. So you're trying to hire more people, but there's less people to hire. They're going to print money. Spoiler alert, the North and the South are both going to print a lot of money. In the South, you can't sell cotton. Why? Because of the blockade, which is part of the Anaconda plan. Good job. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, prices go up as you print money. That's coming up on the next slide. 1 pound of beef goes from 12 cents to $8. What's it called when your purchasing power declines because of the increase in the quantity of money that's being printed? What is that concept called? Inflation. Exactly. Okay, so they're printing money. I'll try to bring it in, show you guys. I've got some Confederate money, and one side it was a $3 bill, and you flipped it over and they stamped a $5 bill. They literally just printed different ink on the same dollar bill and just said, here, look, it's gone up in value. That's not exactly what happens though. Okay, in the North, you get the first paper currency, the first income tax. Here's a video about economics. I will cut it down and not make you watch the whole thing.
Lincoln makes key decisions that are also part of the margin of victory. He's a great president. But another thing that is absolutely crucial is the way that the federal government is able to manage massive quantities of industrial production that equip an army that is larger than any army, certainly the U.S. has ever seen, and probably larger than any army that had actually fought in a war before. The Union ultimately fields an army of 2 million men. That's a huge army, and 2 million men require a huge amount of equipment. The war required, in fact, 1 billion rounds of ammunition, 1 million horses and mules, 1.5 million barrels of pork, 100 million pounds of cotton, 6 million woolen blankets, 6 million pairs of trousers. There had never in history been an effort to equip this many men with this many things. So how did the Union Army and how did the Union government do it? In fact, the conflict will ultimately cost over $13 billion. Now put that in context by remembering that at the start of the war, the entire country's wealth amounted to only about $12 billion, about 1/3 of which was in fact slaves. So the U.S. economy, in effect, invested its entire wealth, all of the wealth it had, in paying for this massive war. So how did the federal government do it? It did it by borrowing from the future, by selling bonds. And it also did it by printing money. It printed so much money, in fact, that inflation increases dramatically and started to eat away at the wages of the workers who were producing all these new war goods. Even as their wages rose, inflation rose even faster, so that the value of their daily wage dropped by 30% during the course of the war. We can see that as a cost that's paid even by those who don't go and fight in the war.
Okay, women in the Civil War, the men are off fighting. Who's gonna tend to the farm and keep the food coming in? Women are running the farms, both in the North and the South. On a few occasions, women will disguise themselves as men, join in the army. They're doing the factory work. They had been for a while already. Nurses, teachers, women are doing their part to the best of their ability. Okay, before Fredericksburg, McClellan is fired. Why is McClellan fired? What was Lincoln's quote about him? Remember Lincoln said McClellan has a case of the slows? He made up every excuse under the sun not to really take the battle to the South. So if McClellan's fired for being slow, what's Burnside about to do? What do you think? What would you do? Time to get going. Charge on in, right? Okay, that's great if you have the initiative and you have the battle plan, and he has a decent plan. It just takes too long to get the boats, and so you're going to be charging into an enemy that is entrenched and is waiting for you. The element of surprise is completely gone, and that's not a good situation. Here are some pictures. This is when they're getting ready to cross the river. Take a look at that. Here they're lined up. Here's the actual battle plan. They're going to be behind that wall. They're going to charge the wall. I forget exactly how many times they do it, around 14 different times. What's that an example of? When you are trying to charge and bayonet someone, but yet they have a new, exactly, old tactics, new technology. Remember the rifle? Okay, the rifle is now in play in the Civil War. It's no longer musket and bayonet strategy, but yet they still try to do some of that, and when they try to do that, it fails. Okay? Here's a video about Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg, Virginia saw a new type of war in 1862 and a new type of warfare. Following the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862, Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and he was getting ready to sign the Emancipation itself on January 1st, 1863. If he was going to do that, he was going to have to do it from a position of strength, which relied exclusively on military victory. It was vital that his armies press forward at once in the fall and early winter of 1862. Where generals hesitated, generals were sacked. Here in the East, General George B. McClellan was one of the slowest of them all. In November, he was replaced by General Ambrose Everett Burnside, one of the most aggressive, assertive officers in the Army of the Potomac at the time. Once he was put in command, he decided to bring his army directly to Fredericksburg. Relying on speed and surprise, he was hoping to be able to cross the Rappahannock River and seize the city of Fredericksburg before the Confederates could react and block him on the road to Richmond. He thought his plan out pretty well, even to the point where he ordered up pontoon bridge material to be waiting for him here so that he could cross the river without missing a beat. When he got the approval of the president, he was marching within 24 hours. 2 days later, he showed up here at Fredericksburg and caught the Confederates entirely off guard. There weren't 1,000 Confederates anywhere near this city to stop Burnside from crossing. Despite the fact that Burnside had 135,000 troops congregating on the Rappahannock River, he was unable to get across the river itself. The army had showed up, but their bridges had not. One of the great bureaucratic missteps or misfires of the war had occurred. It took 10 days to find the pontoons and send them to Burnside. By the time the bridges arrived, this entire scene had changed. Robert E. Lee and 78,000 Confederates were on the other side of the river waiting for Burnside. The plan that Burnside had crafted had fallen apart. But it was still absolutely vital for the president that Burnside go forward and gain victory at any cost. In December, Burnside forced his way across the Rappahannock, laying bridges under fire on December 11th. He seized the city. December 12th, he filled the city and the floodplain below with 100,000+ troops. On December 13th, he launched a series of futile, disastrous attacks against the Confederates fortified on Marye's Heights. The battle ended with tremendous disaster for the Union Army. They had lost 13,000 men here at Fredericksburg and had nothing to show for their efforts. The Confederates, safely ensconced in the hills outside of the city, lost only about 4,000 to 5,000 troops tops. The Battle of Fredericksburg was one of the true milestones of the American Civil War. While it didn't exactly change the outcome of the war, Abraham Lincoln, for example, did sign the Emancipation Proclamation despite the defeat. The war itself was changing. The unprecedented nature of the combat downtown, bombarding a city, forcing their way across the river under fire, all these things had changed. Fighting behind a stone wall had become the genesis for fighting under cover or trench warfare. In the bigger picture, the Union Army, their morale had all but collapsed following this battle. Many deserted in the aftermath of Fredericksburg, but those who stayed had a brand new resolve that this war was not going to be easy and it was not going to be short. It was that resolve that would drive them on, press them towards Gettysburg and towards victory. For the Confederates, many of them thought that Fredericksburg was marking the beginning of the end. They had high hopes that Southern independence would become a reality in the near future.
Okay, welcome back. This slide is important. By the way, your word of the day is cheesecake. So make sure you fill out the form today. After you watch the rest of this video, put cheesecake as the answer, and you'll get your credit for being in class. But you still got to write stuff down. Don't abandon ship. Here we go. You're in Fredericksburg. Who wins this battle? The North, 11,000 casualties, 11,116. The South, 10,000 casualties. So who wins this battle? You say the South because they inflicted more damage on the North. But look at this. Doo-doo-doo-doo. The North only loses 11.4% of its men. The South loses 18.7% of its men. So who really won? Does that make sense? This is an important concept. How can you lose all these battles but end up winning the war? Because even though you lose more men per battle, you started with more people. Therefore, you're losing a lower population, or excuse me, a lower percentage per battle. Does that make sense? Excellent. Here's a nice little graph. Okay, and that's going to be it for today. Make sure tomorrow you take the quiz. There might be an assignment, but just check back for the class tomorrow, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.